and we were saying smart contracts are neither smart or not contracts because they are not really that complex and they're not really a legal mechanism. And I would translate that into DHP, digital health passes, and say they are not just digital, they are not just for health, and they are not just passes, right? So the reason I'm saying that is because I want to go back to the original vision that we had to build these platforms. And the original vision is that we as individuals will need to be in charge of accessing our own medical, clinical information and be able to decide who and how are we going to share this information with a third party. So we started working on this actually back in 2019, before the pandemic started. And we started building the platform to enable that empowerment of the individual to collect information and decide how and with whom they would share. And the pandemic started, and we realized very quickly that we had the responsibility to bring that technology in the forefront and build the first version of digital health pass for testing results, for people to be able to ingest their test results from different places and then share this information back then, mostly with airlines and maybe cruise lines in some places. And then over time, as vaccination took place and vaccine status was becoming available, we actually added additional ways to engage with digital health pass to include vaccination status as well. But the key to us is really to look at this as a long-term journey when we are building this platform, which is really the reset of the management of your clinical and medical information as an individual, so that you get better access, you get access to more information, and because you do that, you engage more with your own health, right? And at the end of the day, that's what's important to us. So that's why I'm saying they're not just digital, because in some cases people don't have access to a smartphone, and we have to build the solutions to be non-digital as well, different ways to do this. They're not just health, because unless you have a very broad definition of healthcare or health in general, but we collect a lot of different data points into the digital health pass wallet that are not just specific to health. And at the end of the day, it's not just a pass, because the pass is, in our mind, more of a green, red kind of status. Either I am vaccinated or not. But the real benefit of the platform is to say I have now access to some information, and I can decide to share with a third party for them to either make a decision or bring me some recommendation on what should I do next to engage with my own healthcare. So let me stop here, but it's important to put that into perspective, into the large vision of the product.
Good. So we're going to touch on some of these points again. And so thank you for that overview. Since this is a blockchain conference, I wanted you, in the second question of mine, to speak specifically to the blockchain-ish design around this, and where the blockchain, why it's on blockchain, and so on.
Yeah, I think many different reasons. And we look at it from a trust layer point of view. So we look at that from a where do we need to provide trust into the platform, and in many cases, the translation of that requirement of trust, need of trust, brings us to using a blockchain solution, a blockchain platform. So being IBM, we've built this on the Ibm Blockchain Solutions, which is open source based on Hyperledger Fabric. So it's a completely open source platform that anyone on this call, anyone in the world can download and start playing with. And that's very important for us, because that's the first layer of trust. The first layer of trust is we're not building a proprietary solution. We are building something on a platform that is completely open to anyone. The second layer of trust is that we are not, because we don't need to, and because we don't want to, we are not collecting medical or clinical data from individuals as IBM. And the way we do that is we actually enable the individuals to connect with their own medical data wherever that this data is, So if that data is a vaccine registry for a state or a pharmacy system or a hospital, the individual has access to this information, decides to import this information into their phone, into their wallet, and we do not keep this information. All right. So the ingestion and access to the information, obviously, all of that is encrypted, but we do not keep that data set. So that's the second level of trust. I would call that the data ingestion level of trust. The third layer, which is also very interesting, is the fact that this information that you collect on your phone needs to be verified, right? And we use different mechanisms to do that based on different standards. And we can talk about that a little bit if you want, Erran. But at the end of the day, what's important is to trust the issuer, is to make sure that when I collect my vaccine status from the state of New York or from CVS, I can verify that that credential or that vaccine record is actually coming from the right CVS and the right state of New York, and not someone faking to be a CVS. That's one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is when I travel to Singapore and I show up with my CVS vaccine record, and Singapore has no idea what CVS is, they need to be able to verify that I got a credential from a trusted entity. And even if they don't know CVS, they can verify that CVS is a trusted entity. So that's what I would call the third level of trust. And we also use blockchain technologies for that. And the last level of trust, I usually do everything in three things, but I couldn't here. It has to be four. The fourth level of trust is actually the protection of how the data is going to be handled by what we call the verifier of this information. So the verifier being a border control, an airline, a university, an event even, right? Or an employer, and we'll talk about employer in a minute. How do we make sure that they do not use this information the wrong way? And if they do, then it's actually becoming visible to the rest of the ecosystem. So we enable that. We are not controlling that because we can't, right? Once the data that I decided to share with the verifier is available, we as IBM do not control what's happening, but we enable them to be able to provide that control back to the individual. So those are the four layers of trust that we enable through the technology, through the blockchain technology that we have.
Good, thanks. So when we've chatted, one of the things you told me about where we're going in the future, the holy grail is interoperability. That you at IBM, you want to reach some kind of level of interoperability, and we're seeing that now with the European Union. They released their European Union DCC, the Digital COVID Certificate. It now is available to all 27 nations of the European Union. Plus, through the gateway, it already has like 16 countries that it interfaces with, including Switzerland and Israel and even the Vatican. And it has a number of 20 countries in the pipeline in my last count that they're negotiating with, and they'll open up the gateway. So that's a significant number of countries. We're getting to a point where these digital health passes, I should say, are becoming interoperable. So talk to us a little bit about that topic.
Yeah, it's a very interesting topic because it's very relevant for our topic here, the pandemic, but you can apply that to any kind of health data that we're going to have to share in the future. The interesting piece here is that we need standards, we need interoperability at two different places. We need the standard when we issue credentials, when we create them. So when I got my credential into my wallet, that is a specific format that is going to be recognized by someone else. And that's the issuer standard, if you want. So you have a lot of standards today available, and some of them are completely closed standards. But we are moving up, thankfully, we are moving more and more towards very open standards. And DCC that you mentioned is one of them. There is an initiative called Good Health Pass, which is also driving a lot of standardization across different issuers of data. And then you have, in the US in particular, the Smart Health Card standard, which is driven by VCI, an organization led by MITRE and many, many others. And we are part of that organization, obviously, which is what most of the pharmacies, most of the states in the US are driving towards. So that's very important, because using the standard makes us more effective and more efficient as well. We don't have to spend as much time and money to comply with too many standards. So that's the first one. So we have, within IBM, what we've done is anytime we have a new standard that we start tracking, we either participate in those organizations to drive them towards a common set of characteristics that we are very passionate about, privacy being one of them, and we adopt them into our platform. So today, in the IBM wallet, which is something you can download right now on the App Store, you can ingest a VCI credential, you can ingest a DCC Europe credential, you can ingest a credential from India, and you can ingest any credential compatible with Good Health Pass. And we are working to ingest additional credentials from different places in the world. But with those, we cover a lot of the new use cases that we need to cover. It's very important to us. That's this notion of open platform is critical for us. Well, I mentioned open source, but open standard is the other aspect of it. And then you have the verification piece. So we also need to make sure that we're not closing the ecosystem by saying, you have to get your credential from me, and the only way to be verified is by me as an organization. And so we need to make sure that those verification mechanisms, whether it's an API call or whether it's an app that is used to scan a QR code, that those verification mechanisms are actually open and compatible with many standards. And so that's exactly what we did as well. Our verifier service and app is multi-standards, multi-credential. So to your point, Erran, I think interoperability is key. But I think we have to be very specific when we talk about this, about the two sides of the equation, the issuing side and the verification side.
Yeah, that's the holy triangle in digital health passes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, Eric, you've been a pioneer. We've talked about some generalities, but you at IBM have been the pioneer in the U.S., the most prominent U.S. digital health pass, which is the Excelsior Health Pass in New York State, which was announced way back in April, I believe, and then it was rolled out fairly soon after that. And so, tell us about that.
Yeah, it was fascinating to work with the state of New York. It's a great state to work with because of the diversity and the commitment from that team to deliver something really valuable for everybody to go back to work, to go back to restaurants, and so on. And so we came up with typically IBM is not a direct consumer brand, so we don't really sell our solutions to consumers, but we sell to our large clients, our large partners, such as the state of New York. They deliver a solution themselves. And that's what we did with the Excelsior Pass in the state. And so the idea was to say, let's give a chance for everybody in the state to get access to test results and vaccination status. Vaccination status, if you're not in the US, if you don't live in the US, are recorded at the state level in the US. So that's where when you get vaccinated, regardless of where you are vaccinated, that information makes its way into what we call an immunization registry at the state level. And that's where we were exposing the information to individuals for them to import that into their phone. And then we were offering every business in the state of New York the ability to verify the Excelsior Pass so that they can make sure that people are engaging with themselves, whether it's employees or visitors or customers, were able to be verified, and all of that was part of the solution we built to the state of New York. So it was really interesting to do it at scale, right? And we have about 6 or 7 million people in the state of New York using the solution today. Someone told me the other day, this is the largest blockchain implementation in the world when you look at the number of users if you don't count the crypto platforms. This is the largest blockchain platform in the world today. So that's pretty satisfying if you spend many years of your life working on blockchain. That's a pretty satisfying event. But we don't want to stop here, right? And we keep working with the state of New York on adding additional solutions and capabilities to the platform. And for example, we added the VCI compliance, which was not available when we did the first version because it was still in draft mode. And we added the VCI capability into the Excelsior Pass so that now people can import their verification status, not just from the state, but from other places as well. So back to interoperability.
So in the state of New York, let's just stay on that a little bit more for those who haven't traveled to New York. In the state of New York, you would flash your Excelsior Pass to get in to watch a basketball game at the Brooklyn Barclays Center, and you would flash it to get into a restaurant in Manhattan. And where else have you seen it used?
The US Open. I went to the US Open, the tennis US Open. They were checking Excelsior passes as well as the regular IBM pass, by the way. Many restaurants, hotels, conference centers, Madison Square Garden. And actually, we don't actually know where the solution is used because we, compliant with our vision of privacy, we don't actually track where the verification is taking place. And because the application is free for small businesses in the state of New York, I'm pretty sure a lot of them are using the verification because it's very easy to use. It's just a QR code reader. And we don't even track that. So that's refreshing when you see people using it. And I got a text a few days ago from a friend, and he said, "You saved my life because I didn't bring my CDC card with me because I left it at home, but I was able to get my credential on my phone, and I could enter the building he was going to a meeting, and because of you." So that was pretty cool.
That's a nice feeling.
Yeah,
very nice. One of the interesting things that you said to me when we talked was now that we're let's say 9 months into this era of digital health passes, as a result of the pandemic, you said we have to think about how we measure success with the digital health passes, and I wanted you to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think the reflex, if you want to measure success, is adoption, right? And look at how many people are actually using it. We measure success in many different ways. Adoption is one of them, but the actual ubiquity of the solution on the verification side is also very important for us. So we want to make sure that you don't just get access to your information, but you also get the verifiers, so the restaurants, the hotels, the airlines, the cruise lines, the employers. We want to make sure that they also verify those credentials. And the reason I'm saying that is because if you just do a visual verification of a credential, right? And so, very often you see that in the state of New York, by the way. You see people going with, I'm trying to find my app right now, and I open my app, and you see, my passes. So I open one of them, I see a green QR code, and then people say, "Oh, yeah, you're good to go. Please go in." Sometimes they check your ID to make sure it's the same name, but they actually don't scan the QR code. And the issue with that is they don't actually get the right level of guarantee that this is a valid credential that I'm presenting. So in some cases, it's okay. And I'm not a medical professional, I shouldn't say it's okay. In some cases, the verifier is comfortable with doing that visual verification. For us, what really makes sense is to actually do the technical verification, so scanning that QR code. And it's not important as much for the short-term COVID-19, it is, but it's not just for that. The key to us is we need to drive the mindset that when I share information with someone, that someone has the ability to verify that data has not been altered, that data is associated with me, and that can be used because I provided consent to share this information. And it's not as much important for the verifier, but it's important for me because I'm expecting something in return when I share this information. And I want that something to be very, very specific and accurate, right? If I share information to get treated with the right amount of drugs for a specific disease, I want to make sure that I got the right drug. So that verification mechanism of my data when I share it is becoming extremely critical for your own benefit. And that's what we are measuring as well, not just the adoption of importing the credential, but the verification itself. And then the third one is very quickly the integration of our solution into many different existing systems, through integration into the badging system to get into a building, into your virtual key when you go to a hotel, into your tickets when you fly, into a badge when you go to a conference, right? That level of integration is also very important for us because it creates ubiquity and it creates a very seamless user experience, because now I can get a credential from one place and use it in a different place, and I don't have to recreate a credential every time I need to be verified. So that's very important to us as well, the ubiquity of the solution.
And very interesting the idea that it's tied into so many kinds of entry applications. And that leads into my last question before we turn to the audience and ask them for questions. So everybody in the audience, think about some questions in the meantime. You also have a nice vision for the future. You're thinking beyond this pandemic and the use of the IBM Digital Health Pass, and where our future will be with this kind of technology that is blockchain based.
So I think you can dream a lot of things that are really interesting. And so I give you maybe some examples of the use cases we are working on. If you start collecting your own medical information, which we call that the digital clone, right? So I'm building my digital clone on my phone, and I'm getting actually information that no one else has access to in aggregate. So I'm getting information from my lab results. I'm getting my information from my doctor. I'm getting my genomics information, and I'm getting data coming from my watch or medical devices around me. And really today, no one has access to that data set in a single place. But because of DHP, you can aggregate this information in one place. And what can you do with this, right? So you can share this data set in very different ways. One is you can, as I mentioned earlier, you can say, I'm going to share this information to get the right treatments for the right disease or the right conditions that I have with the right parties at the right time, right? And because I'm sharing more information than they typically do have access to, I'm going to get better treatment. I can decide to share this information for medical clinical trial purposes, right? And by the way, when I do that, because I provide value to a pharma company, I can be rewarded for providing my data, right? So the virtual clinical trial, which we keep talking about, especially in the context of the pandemic, we can enable that vision by asking people to participate by sharing data directly from their own wallet with a pharmaceutical company for them to develop drugs, and they can reward me for sharing my information. I'm a pretty boring patient because I don't have any specific conditions. So I would not get a lot of value, I think, by sharing my medical information. But someone with a very unique condition, or actually maybe I don't know I have a condition, right? But someone with a very specific condition could really generate a lot of income by sharing that profile with different pharmaceutical company. So you can see the shift of what we call profit pools, right, between the different participants in the market. By saying now, because I own my information, I actually participate in that marketplace in a very different way. And I'm sure we can dream about many others, but those are the big ones, right? Clinical trial, drug treatment, care management, in general, but also, very tactically. I just moved from one state to another, and I had to change my insurance plan because my previous insurance didn't operate in the state I live in now. and they don't talk to each other. What a surprise. And so I could become the bridge between them by sharing information between them, because now I do have access to this information. So you have also very tactical and practical ways to use the platform without dreaming too much.
Nice. I like that you're a dreamer, Eric. That's very important for all of us. And with that, I'd like to open up to anyone who has questions here in the audience. I have Catherine.
I have a question to kick us off.
Yeah, please.
So I'm curious about maybe some of the myths that you hear in public discussion, and what are some myths about the digital health pass that you want to dispel?
Oh my gosh, we have how many hours do we have? No, I think the first thing is almost like a surprise we got when we started working with the state of New York, and people were complaining that the state of New York was becoming Big Brother by collecting information about every citizen who got vaccinated. What they actually did not realize is that every state in the US has been doing this for 25 years. So I think it was interesting because we know that because we live in this industry. I knew that my vaccine records were collected by different states in the US, even though I was not born here, because I am from this industry. But many people don't realize that. They don't know. And so the education part of this was very interesting. And so we had to work on that education part with the state to make sure people understand this is not something new that we are doing because of the pandemic. It's public health. It's a service to you, right? When your kids are going to school and you need to know they've been vaccinated, you can go back to the state. Well, interestingly enough, after we started working on this, many states in the US also reached out to us and worked with us to build their own solution. And the amount of requests that they are getting today compared to what they were getting before the pandemic about vaccination status, forget about COVID-19, but just any other vaccination status, grew by 200%. And so this education just started to spread, and now people know that they can go to the state to get vaccination information, which they didn't know before. So that was an interesting one, a discovery, I guess, if you want. I think the other interesting topic that we keep talking about is the name of those platforms, right? So we argue even between ourselves, should we call that a pass, and should we call that a wallet? Should we call that something else? Credentials, right? You mentioned passport earlier, right? So there's a lot of interesting discussion on this. To me, at the end of the day, it's more branding than anything. I think what's important is to keep in mind that we are doing that for the individuals to be more in control of their data. I think that's the message. So maybe we need to change the name of those passes or passports or credentials. At the end of the day, it's the value to you as an individual is what we focus on. So that's another topic of interest, a funny one, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how branding can create myths. Like it's really a fascinating thing. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So since I don't see any other questions here, Catherine, help me if I'm not.
I think we do have one in the chat.
We do. Yeah, we do. Okay, I'll read it out loud. Or Eric, can you see it?
Yeah, I can see it. Yeah.
All right. So
you want to read it for everybody?
Yeah, I'll read it for everybody. Which entity would be contacted for resolution for information potentially shared as phones can be stolen? Let's see. I can't quite read the bottom of this. As a bouncer would have the receiving app.
So on the first one, the information that you collect on your wallet, on your phone, is protected as the same way you protect your passwords. I was about to say passport. The same way you protect your passwords on your phone. So if you lose your phone, this information will not be accessed by anyone unless you share your password with that person. That's number one. You can always go back and get another phone and recreate the credential from the original source of information, right? So you can go back and say, I'm going to download the wallet, and I'm going to reconnect my wallet to, the state of New York, and re-import my credential into my phone. So this information can be recreated by going back to the original data source. So that's important. I think maybe an extension of the question, and maybe that's where Brenda, you were going, is in some cases we have to capture many different credentials for different people on the same phone. When I travel with my kids, for example, I can import their tickets, right, their boarding passes into my phone, and we enable that as well, the ability to import vaccine status and test results into a phone if you want to do that for your family, for example. So that's maybe an extension of your question, but that's also something that we can enable. I'm not sure I understand the end of the question. As a bouncer would have the receiving app. I'm not sure I understand what it means. Erran, you can help me maybe.
No, I can't. Brenda, do you want to speak?
Yeah.
Brenda, are you there? She is still logged on. Well, maybe Brenda turned away for a moment. We can come back to her. I have a question for you, since I don't see any other questions. One of the things that we know in the healthcare arena, and now with the vaccinations of COVID, is that there's no one central place in the United States where all these vaccinations are being logged. In fact, when Professor Lassity and I talked to one of the people who in some way provide guidance to these databases, we heard that there's over 1,000 such databases. They're essentially trust registries, right, across the United States. Every drugstore chain, every county, some companies, the military, they all have their own database of vaccinations, and none of them talk to each other. So when I just got my booster shot, the person who gave me the shot actually re-entered all my information, re-entered it, along with all those random numbers and letters of the particular lot of the vaccination. And so what are the chances that she got it right without a typo? They're not that good, actually.
Yeah.
So this is it's quite messy here in the United States. All right, so that's the scene of this. Now, tell us about how you at IBM deal with that messiness.
So you have two ways, and I agree, this is messy, right? This is really messy. I got vaccinated in one state, my second shot in another state, and my booster maybe in another state. How do you make sure that when I collect my vaccine status, I aggregate this information in one place? It's a pretty big mess. But I think that's where standardization of exposing this information to individuals is becoming very important. And what we are doing with Smart Health Card is a good example of that. So many of those states today, many of those organizations, pharmacy and others, are actually adopting Smart Health Card as a standard, which means that as a platform, we do not need to engage with 1,000 different databases to make sure that we expose that information to individuals, because we just quote unquote comply with the Smart Health Card standard. And whether it's CVS, Walmart, or a state, you can import this information because that information is presented with the same format, Smart Health Card. So that's one way to address the issue. The other way, obviously, is to create the ecosystem and to make sure that we have enough coverage and enough exposure to those databases. And that's where being IBM is quite helpful, because we are connected to many of the organizations already through the different activities that we do for many of them. And so it's usually an extension of our relationship with the pharma, with the states, with different organizations, even federal agencies, to make sure that we partner with them and expose their information to the individuals operating on our platform. So it's not easy. It's much easier in other countries, right? Because they have a central repository. However, in central repository countries, you still have data issues because people did enter the wrong data in the first place, right? Or because you have people with the same name and the same, in some cases, the same name and the same date of birth, and so you need to resolve those issues, right? So it's not because you have a centralized system that you have an easier data management framework. But yeah, it is not it's not an easy issue, but it's a very critical one that we are working on because, again, we are not doing that just for COVID-19 and just for the pandemic. We are doing that for the long run, and we want to give you as an individual access to all this information regardless of where it is.
Good, thank you. And now we have a few more questions. Good. All right. So Kurt asked, is interoperability a concern with companies like Clear, who also help us gain admittance to stadiums? And now let me set up for Eric. Clear is essentially a competitor of yours.
Yes.
And not only that, but Clear doesn't use blockchain, right?
They don't. They have a different business model too. So one of the things that we, diverge on between Clear and us is the collection of information. Clear is in the business of collecting information. They collect your biometrics as well for you to engage with their platform. And we didn't feel like it was a necessary function of the platform to deliver the same value, which is verification of credentials. We didn't feel like it was needed to centralize data and collect biometrics. So that's, I would say, the biggest difference between Clear and us. However, Clear and us are using VCI credentials to ingest credentials into our platform, right? So we are using the same standards. We are pushing the same standards. We benefit from using the same standards too.
Good. Thank you. Next question is by Ryan. He's asking if IBM's Digital Health Pass is being used in the other states outside of New York that are expanding. So let's list the states that we know have Digital Health Passes. California, Louisiana, Colorado, I think is in process, and Hawaii. Those are the ones I'm aware of.
Yeah, so not all of them are using the IBM platform, but some of them, and then we have discussion with a dozen more for them to use some technology from our platform, whether it's the issuing capability or the verification or the wallet itself. So you will see that more and more, and many states are using that. I think what's interesting too is we are seeing a lot of employers actually mandating vaccination as a condition of employment, and we've seen that in many cases, especially when those companies are also federal contractors, and they are using a lot of them are using our platform to collect information about individuals and share that information with their employees and with the companies they interact with. So that's a very important usage. It's very, very recent activity around that after the Biden mandate around vaccination for companies with more than 100 employees in the US.
Good, thank you. And Brenda's back, and I'll read what Brenda wrote. She's saying that individuals at airports, bouncers at restaurants, clubs in New York City all have the receiving end of our information. What's protecting the app from sharing personal information from the individual to others via cookies, etc.? As when the app is downloaded, we can give up privacy when we press the I accept section. So it's the privacy issue, I think, is the larger question that Brenda is asking.
Yeah, so specifically in New York, right? Every implementation is slightly different depending on the scenario and depending on the regulatory framework we operate into. But in the New York scenario, when you get verified, the verification mechanism is a check mark, right? It doesn't tell you much more than that. It gives you a name and it tells you that the status of that person is vaccinated. It doesn't give you more information than that. So you don't lose your privacy much more than if you were, to show your driver license to get a drink in a bar, right? That's not that's not something that we hear is an issue in the implementation in the state of New York.
Good. Yeah. I just want to reiterate for the people who are here and for the people who are going to watch, the health pass is like the IBM one that Eric talks about. All it shares is the yes/no of whether your status is correct or not, is green, and that's it. It's purely a binary indicator. It doesn't pass on other critical fields, and so it does protect privacy, I think, quite well.
Yeah. I think what's interesting too is it's a black and white kind of answer, but the rule set is defined by the verifier, not by us. So the verifier is saying, I want people to be vaccinated in the last 6 months. Maybe that's their condition, right? And another one would say, I want someone to be vaccinated in the last 12 months. And I want someone tested in the last 72 hours. And all of those conditions, all of those rules can be defined by the verifier entity. And what they got is, yes, Eric is compatible or compliant with your rule set. But they don't know where I got tested, where I got vaccinated, which vaccine did I get, and so on. They just know that I'm compatible with the rule set that they set in the first place.
Yeah. And with that, I'm going to pass this back to Catherine.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, so much. We got so much insight into, I'd say, one of the most interesting practical applications of blockchain happening for us in the last year. So thank you very, very much. Huge round of applause. I think we've had some folks rush off to our next session starting soon, but we appreciate your time today. Fascinating conversations. We'll have this posted shortly on YouTube, and would love to share it with your networks, and we'll continue to share it with students. So we appreciate your time. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine.
Right. Bye.
Eric, great job. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to you.